And thanks, everybody, for being here tonight. It is a pleasure. It's like one warm hug to be here. I think it feels like you're in the midst of a tribe. And what better reason to be here than for this time in conversation with Juliet. Juliet Hall, as many of you know, and if you don't know, you're in for a total treat, is an author, speaker, advisor, expert on leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. But more than that, she is a sage and an inspiration. She's the principal of Juliet Hall Incorporated, and she does leadership consulting in her business. More than that, I think the fact that she's an author and an author of a story that if you raise your hand if you've read Own Your Opportunity. Right? She's the author of Her Fate. Is she not, right? I mean, with divine guidance and alignment. And in authoring that, she has shared with us a roadmap for excellence, for understanding, for self-discovery, and opened up to share her journey that we can all learn from and grow from. So tonight we'll talk about that. As a professional navigator of crossroads herself, she shares that guidance and counsel with others to help them pursue self-discovery, develop natural talents, lean into their gifts, and maximize their leadership. I love the maximize phrase. If you've read the book, you'll see she talks about self-maximization, right? A lot of times you think about self-actualization, but how about maximization? I love the level up on that. So let's get started on a conversation of leveling up our living and our professional possibilities and our self-discovery.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Thank you. That was beautiful. I love it.
I should shout out that she is a Spelman College grad.
Yes. It's our homecoming this week.
UGA Terry College of Business. So let's not, she is well accomplished both in living and in credentials, and maybe most of all in heart. I think that is what comes through in reading the book and in knowing her, that she has a countenance that reflects all that goodness, and also has a story that she has to tell that shares it with us. So let's get started.
Okay.
First of all, Juliet, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
This is a big deal.
Thank you.
Tell us about how it's been received so far. I mean, tell us about coming to this moment that we're at tonight and what that's been like.
Yeah, I think it's been received very well. I have heard from several readers, people that I know, people that I don't know, people on social media who are sending me messages on their initial reactions to the book. And it's been very affirming. The word that I'm hearing that is common is that the book is relatable. A lot of readers are identifying with the emotions of the experiences in the book, and while that is validating, I also find it to be rather sad, because what I'm hearing from people is that these experiences, because they are relatable, it means that they're common and not enough people are talking about it. And I have learned through this that we might have a tendency to normalize workplace trauma, and that's not a good thing. But I do want to just, there are a couple of responses that I have received so far from a couple of individuals, well, several individuals actually, but I'm just going to call out two. This one is from someone I know named Ashley. She may be here. But she sent this to me after she first got the book. She wasn't even finished reading it yet, but she wrote, "Juliet, I'm reading your book, and I'm only on chapter 2. But wow, you have a story that should be told, and I'm so glad you wrote this book. I literally almost cried driving home last night after reading the introduction in chapter 1. I felt like my experiences were validated. I felt seen." And that really touched me to hear that, because we all have a need to be seen and acknowledged and our presence validated, not just in the workplace but also in life too. This message that I want to share actually came from one of my social media followers, someone named Ernie, who lives in Baltimore, Maryland. Never met him before. He bought the book. He also purchased the audio book. And this is his initial response. I could relate so much to the story of rejection. At the job, the feelings of sadness, bouts with stress, and passive-aggressive attacks of coworkers that lead to a massive hostile working environment. Emotional, depressing struggles of, why don't they like me? What have I done to them to treat me this way? I knew I always went above and beyond to the highest levels of professionalism and accomplishment of duties. I often wondered, if I'm making you look great by my awesome work, why do you hate me so much? A former coworker, a licensed therapist and dear friend, brought great perspective to the situation. And she explained, your amazing work means nothing to them. It's your aura that troubles them. You have that it factor. They feel your presence at all times. It will either be admired or hated. It was then I realized that I was bigger than the environment I was in. The hostility came not because I was lesser than, but because I was greater than. This came from a gentleman, who also could identify with some of the experiences, the emotions in the book. And I just wanted to share those two from two different people and how they're connecting. And I'm getting more and more responses like this from people who care to share their feedback with me.
I don't feel surprised at all, really, because the richness in the story and how universal, to your point, sadly, these experiences are. Raise your hand if you can relate to any of what Juliet just described in the workplace, right? With the wanting to be seen, needing to be heard, feeling like my light can't shine in this space, and in the process, seeing yourself. One of the things that struck me in the book is that journey, right? The fact that that hurts, and the trauma that comes from it. Talk about the process of pouring out and being vulnerable and sharing your journey in the book and how you got through that.
It was painful, for sure. It was also cathartic. When I left corporate America 6 years ago, admittedly, there were still some feelings of bitterness and anger, a little bit of PTSD even, because you'll read in the book that I actually start the story with, in the prologue, I admit to having nightmares, and it was my subconscious working things out. And so the journey of writing this book was very, very thoughtful. I worked with a consulting editor who really challenged me to bleed on the pages, to really, share how I was feeling through my experiences. And the book is a representation of my own thoughts and feelings and perceptions of the experiences that happened to me. And so, but it's not a tell-all book. Let me be clear about that, because there was actually took a lot of things out.
You don't know the half.
Yeah, you don't know the half. I didn't want this to be a book of woe is me, or, because the truth of the matter is that I had a lot of positive experiences while I was in corporate America too. And I would not be the woman that I am today if I hadn't gone through challenging experiences. I share in the book that there really is no such thing as a perfect company or a perfect community or a perfect church or a perfect home, for that matter, because there's no such thing as perfect people. But we need the good and the bad experiences to cultivate who we are and to challenge our assumptions of the world and the people that we relate to. We also need those challenging experiences to develop us and to help us discover who we really are. this has been a journey of self-discovery for me, not just writing the book, but the experiences that I share over the course of 20 plus years of, my work life. And so, yeah, it's been a very challenging journey, but I'm very grateful for the lessons that I've learned along the way, the lessons that I share in the book, because it's really helped develop me into the woman that I am. It's helped me to become, the Juliet Hall that you see, and it leads to my own self-maximization that you mentioned earlier, which I believe that living out your intended creation and becoming the best version of your human existence is the gift that we not only give to the world, but in my opinion, living in that excellence of being who you are is ultimately how we glorify our Creator.
Mm-hmm. That spirituality, that divine guidance really does thread through your whole journey, and self-discovery and getting to a point of figuring out how to operate from your strengths, which I'd say is a big thesis in the book. Talk about operating from your strengths and sort of the leadership lessons in that as well, or the development lessons in that.
Yeah, so I have learned that when I'm in a position that makes me feel strong, that's when I'm my most confident. That's when I feel like a champion, where I feel like a genius. It's also, it's also I'm most engaged. It's where I feel valued. And I think that is a lesson that needs to be reminded in corporate America. A lot of leaders need to understand that people want to be in positions that make them feel strong. And as a leader, great leaders develop other leaders, but I believe that we lead through our gifts. We lead through our strengths. We lead when we are in a space where work feels like a natural extension of who we already are. So I think the challenge, though, for a lot of people, I do hear this from being on the speaker circuit. Some people don't know what their gifts are. I would challenge that, though, because in the book I share, think about what made you come alive as a kid. As children, we grew up free. We could be whatever we wanted to be. Somewhere as we got as we got older, the world told us to be realistic, and being realistic kind of killed that dream. And so I challenge people, go back to that childlike wonder, because that could be a clue to what your gifts are. But also take advantage of different learning opportunities in the work that you have, in the companies that you work for, because let the companies pay you to discover your gifts. Think about it that way. And I had a very diverse corporate background. I discovered what I liked. I discovered what I didn't like. I worked in banking operations. I worked in restaurant franchisee operations and consulting. I worked in community affairs. I also worked in a space of corporate storytelling. And when I landed in that space, I just really knew this is what God had in mind when he created me. And it also made me recall back to the years of my youth when I remembered that I've always been a storyteller since 8 years old.
I love the practicality in the book around that and discovering your gifts. Certainly as you get to the end, I'd say like required reading in your workplaces around how to really pull that out for yourself, how to look back over your journey and see what it's been telling you all along. I love your point about being realistic and the fact that that voice can be in our heads. One thing that stood out, though, is that you had a job as a storyteller that didn't even exist, I think, at one point, right? So being realistic, I mean, you were able to carve paths that didn't exist in your corporate journey. Talk about leaning into those possibilities, making them come alive.
Yeah, so that's interesting because you're right. it didn't exist at one point in my corporate life. So the path that I had to carve for myself, the way that I owned my opportunities, was I found that space outside of the workplace. I did that through serving. There's, serving is so important. That's another way to discover your gifts. Just volunteer for a ministry or for, different organizations or causes that you care about. And it was through my service that I tapped into, oh, wow, I'm really good at this. I led the drama ministry at my church, and people loved my skits. I'm a natural comedian anyway, so I have this ability, I guess, to bring laughter to a conversation while bringing truth too. But yeah, it really just started there. It started with serving, not expecting to get paid, not expecting for any kind of reward or recognition, but just purely doing something to edify other people. And that led to writing a play, or plays, I should say, that got produced at the 14th Street Playhouse, the Woodruff Arts Center. It just grew, it snowballed. And I realized that, I guess I should say, before it was drama ministry, I actually got my start on a stage doing community theater. At this broken down theater in Atlanta. I won't say where, but it was just, it was horrible. I tell you, it was like the ghosts. It was just, anyway, but I didn't care, because what other people saw as, I saw opportunity. I saw a place where I could try my hand at something in a safe way. And it didn't matter to me that when I did do a play at that broken down theater, and I wrote in the book only 8 kids and the teacher showed up. I'm expecting, it to be a audience full of people. But I didn't, see, I've learned, don't look at things with your visual eyes. Look at things with your spiritual eyes, because as far as I was concerned, Steven Spielberg was sitting in that audience. And I performed as if he were there. And a simple start can activate a complex dream. So yeah, that's a long answer there, but discovering your gifts, it's really about remembering your gifts, and it's also just putting yourself out there and finding the opportunity and not waiting for someone to tell you, but you take the initiative yourself. And if you don't feel value in the work that you have, try to find that value someplace else.
That's that theme about value and having dimensions beyond your workplace, right? That your workplace doesn't define you, and the feedback there, and getting to peace with that was a really impactful part of your conversation here. And just, I don't know about y'all, but I didn't know Juliet had all these dimensions, that she had been on stage, that she was like doing, theater, drama ministry. And I had known her from a board. I was like, oh, I know she's like a badass in the community. I didn't know she was sort of doing all these things too. So, one of the things that's really wonderful about tonight, but also sharing your story, is that there's a celebration, I think, of having many dimensions, of the nuances of life and the workplace too, and of the humor. I mean, as you dig in here, chapter 2 is a real good one for a lot of laughs. But there's a lot of laughs in there too. Where did you get your sense of humor? Who knew she was like clowning all the time?
I think my grandmother, Maddie Mae, in Rock Hill, South Carolina, now she had a 5th grade education. Maybe not so eloquent in her speech. That's probably where I learned to cuss, but Yeah, but she made you laugh too. I mean, I have a very rich background because I just feel like I come from different worlds, and I have both sides of my family that their blood courses through my veins, and but my grandmother was extremely funny, and I don't know. I think my dad says and he's funny too. My dad is a hoot, and so I probably got some of that.
Well, double click on that for me in the sort of, the role that our history and our families play in our journeys and in the voices in our head. Yeah. You talk a lot about the voice of the elders, right? And that sort of, it resonated for me. I remember leaving my first job, and my dad was like, "You leaving that good job? You must want to shop at Walmart with the Kathy Lee Gifford collection." Like, it was a whole thing. So when you talked about that, I thought, how many of us have, as part of our day-to-day, all the expectations, all the voices, all the sense of gratitude about being here, but not always accompanied with the sense of worthiness. So talk about kind of those voices of the elders.
Well, when I was writing this book, my editor challenged me, Juliet, you're a child of the 70s. You're a Gen Xer. I do think, because I come from a generation where our parents were, they were, I guess they were baby boomers, right? That's the generation before Generation X. They lived through pre-civil rights era. I mean, that's something to think about. I mean, I think for someone who's in their 20s reading this book, they're going to look at it from a different lens than someone who is older, in their 40s or 50s or 60s. And growing up with baby boomer parents, it was a different mindset then. It was, grow up, get an education, get a good job, pay your bills, get married, have kids, die. I mean, it was, you stayed at your job. I know that sounds bad, but that's the condition.
Was the whole journey.
That was the journey. That was the journey. And a lot of my mentors, you talk about the ancestors, but most of the mentors that I have are baby boomers. I've always gravitated towards older women and men. And they have a very different mindset, and it's you stay at your job forever. And I think, so for me, when I was contemplating my career exit out of corporate America, that was unheard of. My dad was like, "Well, you leaving all that money? And what about them benefits? What you gonna do?" My mom was a little bit more tolerant, I think.
Yeah.
But I'm sure she had her doubts too. And, there were a lot of voices around me that, that came right out and said, "You're crazy." And then some that didn't say it, but, they just kind of gave you like, "Okay, well, make sure you have a plan B." But I didn't have a plan B. I believe in my plan A. Because if I had a plan B, which would have been to leave one job to go to another and go through the same cycle again, then it meant that I had little faith in my plan A. So I had to be protective of myself in what I shared with other people. I had to surround myself with new voices, voices who had traveled down the path that I was about to go on, who left the corporate space to really embark on their dream. So I had to change my circle to some extent. I also had to leave people in the corporate world behind me, with the exception of one, this lady over here, Lisa Churchfield. She was the only one I really took with me into this new world. But yeah, so it was, the journey with the ancestors and the voices, they are there, they are good because they really want the best for me. And I think about the line in my book about my grandmother, Maddie Mae, my sister and I were her hope and her dream. And so she's like, are you kidding me? But she had no other world. Her world, the only world that she knew growing up in the Depression, this is my grandmother, was that the only job she knew was a domestic servant, because that's the job for women who look like her. So, so the voices, I leaned on the voices for strength, but I also had to lean on myself and the voice inside myself, which was go and know that God is with me.
That plan A is working, right? This is a manifestation, right? This is a dream happening. But I want to not let it pass that you didn't just go into plan A without preparing for the pivot.
That's true.
That's a whole section in here. I think that's so important, the practicality of that, the fact that this is information and experience that someone can take and really activate on, right? Because often, you can be up late at night, and next thing you know, you're like, oh, I can be a millionaire with like 5 houses, and I can do these things, and you can sort of get caught up in it without somebody really telling you what else comes together. Talk about preparing for the pivot in a way that, I was like, Juliet's like a little mogul over here. Okay. So talk about preparing for the pivot and what we should all be thinking about from that standpoint.
Yeah, so preparing for the pivot requires discipline. And we don't talk enough about discipline. It's unfortunate that you go on social media and you see a lot of profiles that don't tell you the whole story. They make it seem easy. Oh, you can just jump, or you can just do this, and you'll become an overnight success. And maybe you have a 1 in a billion chance of that happening. But the hard lesson is that you have to be disciplined. You have to, I like the definition by Dr. Miles Monroe. Discipline is self-imposed standards for the sake of a higher goal. And I knew what my goal was. I knew the vision, I knew the dream, and to prepare for it meant that I needed to make sacrifices. Like while some of my friends may have been spending money on wherever they like to indulge, what I was saving. There are people who save for a house. There are people who save for their children's education. There are people who save for vacation. I saved for a business because I knew that I had given myself a timeline of when I was going to exit out of corporate America. And it didn't happen overnight. I didn't just jump. It took me a period of 2 years to ready myself and to put myself in a position to win. And but that takes discipline, living beneath your means, so that you can have the lifestyle that you want to have when you do leave, and you can transition smoothly and feel like you're not missing a beat. But that's discipline. That's sacrifice. And it doesn't feel good. Discipline is not a sexy word, but that's just the hard truth. Also, it's not just saving, but it's also clarifying in your mind, what your vision is, knowing who you are, definitely having a strong faith, but also having the right people. I go back to having people. I did not leave. Let me say this. I did not leave corporate America alone. I did not. I made sure I had money in the bank. I had seed money for the business, but I also had money for myself, and I had to map all of this out. But I had a CPA. While I was still working in corporate America, I was already laying the foundation for my, for my business, for my S Corp, and positioning myself. So while I had my 9 to 5, I worked on Juliet Hall, Inc. from 5 to 9. But that also requires sacrifice, because I wasn't watching TV all the time, or I wasn't heavy on social media. There's an opportunity cost with your time. And so I had to make sure that I had the right people in place. I had my CPA, I had a business attorney to make sure, it helped me think through just contracts and legal documents and but yeah, and I share some other things in the book as well. But you have to be very intentional and very thoughtful, and not just jump, because there's really no, in my opinion, there's no wisdom in that.
What about the person who wants to pivot within their space they're in, right? That it's sort of like, I'm a W-2 kind of girl. What you got for me? Talk to that.
Yeah. So and there are a couple of ways that you can do that too. Obviously, I talk about, leaving one company to go to another. So if that is the space that you're in where you're contemplating a move or a shift from one organization to another, what I would say is work for an organization that also works for you, and treat do your research, be very intentional about, the values of that company, the people who work there, the products. Are you excited about that? I call them the 3 Ps. That's in my book. So that was helpful for me when I made my pivot from one company to another. But also I made pivots within the space. So going back to your question, and this is where there are some organizational restructurings that are outside of your control, and I get that. But there are opportunities within an organization that you should always maximize. I mean, for example, if you don't have your graduate degree and your company is offering you tuition reimbursement, take advantage of that. Take advantage of every single resource that you have that will help increase your own human capital. If there's a job opening within your company and it excites you and it allows you an opportunity to gain exposure or to refine your gifts, take advantage of that. I did. I actually went from an opportunity, in corporate America where, I went from a consulting role to a storytelling role. Well, admittedly, I felt like the storytelling role was a little soft. I'm like, wait a minute now, I don't know if this is right for me. But then I thought about it. I had to swallow my pride. And I realized, you know what? This is what I said I've been wanting all along. And who knows what this opportunity could evolve into. And I made the right decision because it grew into incredible visibility for me inside and outside the organization that I worked for.
I want to give the audience time for questions, but I just have to share a handful of things that I thought that were favorites for me in the book, and I want you to sort of pick out of these if there's one or two you want to double click on, okay, Juliet? So one thing you talk about in the book is wanting to be on a stage, and I just thought that was an interesting parallel of the points of being on a stage, whether it was at the restaurant opening or whether it was in the storytelling, and that you were also tracking through the stages of life and the stages of your self-discovery. I love the voices of the elders because I think we all sort of, encounter those in our day-to-day. The bathroom moments and the sassy moments. So sassy was her car, and I mean, if the walls of a car could talk, whose car would not be like, I got some stuff to say? So I thought the sassy moments were also really, in the bathroom moments were really interesting ones. I love that you talked about, what it's like to feel like other in the workplace and all the things that happen. But you also touched on something people often don't talk about, which is being single as an other situation in workplaces, right? That oftentimes people are talking about what they're doing as we all went to Costco this weekend. Well, if you didn't go to Costco with a couple or your kids, how do you get in on that? Or I just got a dog. I realized, I was like, I have access to new conversations from having a dog. But I think that's an important sort of, when we think about inclusion, I thought you touched on something that is often underestimated as a space where we need to invite people in. The other thing I loved is you normalized the need for help and counseling and therapy, right? There's something to be said for that. And in our communities of color especially. So talk about, are there any of the, sort of what are your favorite things in there, or any of those things that you think like, I really had a hard time putting this in, or I thought we had to put this in?
So I was, I think the grief part might have been very challenging to unpack.
I think your line was grieve, then grow.
Grieve, then grow. Yes. Because, and we don't talk about this enough. We don't talk about, or I don't hear a lot of people talk about that separation anxiety or the loss of a dream. And that's what grief is to a large extent. Somewhat, actually, my counselor shared that with me. Grief is really the loss of a dream. The dream could be whatever it is that you attach yourself to, whether it's a goal, whether it's a house. A lot of times, of course, we talk about grief in the context of losing someone we love. But grief comes in it's whatever you attach yourself to that has some real meaning and significance to you. And for me, the grief came because I made the mistake of making an organization that I was, really love and still admire to this day, by the way. But I made it my identity. And I had to learn that's not my identity. No company is my source, number one. But number two, I've learned, if anybody puts their value in their title or in their money or in the company that they work for, they will be they are in trouble. Because when that is gone and there is an expiration date to all of that, then what do you have? Who are you? And, I share in the book having a meeting with, a media executive who, left corporate America, started his successful media company. And he shared with me, he said, Juliet, your value is not what's behind the comma on that business card. The value is what's before the comma. And that value is me, right? And the value that I have, it's not just my education or, because this is an educated room, right? It's not just that or the experiences, but it's the gifts that I carry inside of me. It's what God put inside of me. And nobody can fire your gifts. Nobody can lay off your gifts. Nobody can take credit for giving you your gifts. Now, people can give you opportunities to grow them and to develop and refine them. But the gifts that we all have are inherent. God gave it to us. And it's our job to take that opportunity, own it, develop it, and deploy it. Share it with the world. And so, but going back to that grief, that was very painful. It was hard. My hope and desire is that this book will create conversations like what we're having. People are conversing with me, for sure, calling me, texting me, sending me messages, because it's opening a door for them to say, you know what, I understand. I went through that too. Thank you for validating that. And as I read before, making me feel seen. And we can learn and we can grow. And I do think in the DEI space, I think true change and transformation may not necessarily come through programs or training, but just having conversations and listening to each other and listening to each other's stories.
We need that in our workplaces. And you have, shared your gifts with us in a way that I think we all can carry forward. So thank you for multiplying in that way. Do you want to share? Do you want to read?
Oh, I don't, you know what? Y'all just going to have to get the audio book. I'm not going to eat it. I'm just
You should get the audio book, by the
No,
way. She reads on Audible.
I'm trying to decide. It was really hard. I think for me, the pinnacle to this book for me, like the happiest place for me, comes in chapter 7. And it was when I was on the stage at Georgia Military College. I was the commencement speaker. And it was like, this is what God had in mind when he created me. I mean, and I'm not going to actually read that because I will get choked up. And so I'm going to spare you all from that. But it's a happy place And it's the culmination of the journey, the experiences, the revelation. It's that moment, that aha moment, that's where you just feel God smiling down on you. And if you've ever felt that while you're executing in something that you love to do, just remember that, because I believe that's God's way of telling us, okay, these are the gifts that I've given you, and they are rattling to come out. They are rattling that cage. They want to come out, and so okay, that's I do ramble a lot. Let me see here. I will read. Let's see. I think I'm just going to go to the back. I'm not going to read any of the story, but there's a part in here in the back of the book in the author notes. And I'll just say, I think this is appropriate. Author's notes. It is quite simple. Humankind was not created to be restrained, trapped, or controlled. Every experience, every success and failure, gain and loss, acceptance and rejection, triumph and defeat, open and closed door, can restore us back to purpose and bring us into the fullness of the man or woman we were created to be. Self-maximization, tapping into our own human beingness, the inherent qualities and unique abilities that define who we are, to become the best version of ourselves, is the gift we give to ourselves and to humanity. Ultimately, it is through our excellence in becoming and living out our intended creation at the highest call that we honor our Creator. Isn't it interesting that as children, we were encouraged to dream? We were inspired to be anything we wanted to be if we put our mind to it. Then as we got older, we were admonished to be realistic, to get an education and a job, get married, have children, pay our bills and our taxes, and die. Being realistic is an affront to human creativity, passion, faith, and childlike wonder. However, being realistic imposes doubt, keeps you at bay, and reduces you to think safe and small. Being realistic crushes dreams and robs the human spirit that craves to be boundless and godlike. Being realistic kills self-maximization. Hear this. Everyone is born with a unique ability, a gift or talent that illuminates the true individual and the value he or she offers to the world. Life gives us every chance, every opportunity, every lesson to discover ourselves and our natural abilities. Reflect on that. Pay attention. Even rejection, though painful, is something to celebrate because it redirects us to the right path we were meant to follow anyway. And so I can look back over my experiences and be grateful. There's no such thing as a perfect company, church, community, or childhood, because there are no perfect people. Those environments exist to help us grow and mature, to fertilize, water, crush, and germinate the seed of greatness inside each of us, and to hold up the magic mirror that exposes our truest character, our highest nature, and our most divine essence as human beings. We need the balance of both the good and the bad experiences to self-maximize. It is our responsibility to own our opportunities. The hope is in us to maximize who we are, to be the absolute best version of ourselves, the man and woman God had in mind when he created us, so we can leave a meaningful legacy in this world and go out empty.
Love that. I mean, if you have not gotten your copy of the book, I would encourage you to do that. If you listen to Audible, she's the reader, and she has a voice made for that. One of the things, Juliet, you say in the book when you are in your gifts, when you're on a stage, is that it's like you feel the sun shining on you. And I think it's so fitting that you have on this yellow and have shown on us today, because I think we feel that kind of warmth. So here's to living in our gifts, taking the lessons that you've shared with us, and celebrating and watching what's next for you as well. So thank you for making our what's next brighter. Such a pleasure to be with you tonight.